Come on. That's you guys in the back. There are seats still available.
All right, everyone. Thank you for being here, and welcome to the League of Women Voters 2022 Candidates Night. Thanks for everybody making the time to be here, both audience candidates and all our volunteers. It does take a village. The League of Women Voters is an organization of men and women, Democrats, Republicans, and independents, who promote education and participation in the democratic process. And this certainly is an example, a great example of that effort. Another thing the League is famous for is our Voters Guide. No longer in print, you can now find the Voters Guide on vote411.org. All candidates in every election were asked questions pertaining to issues in this election. If your question isn't answered tonight, you may find it on the Voters Guide. A reminder to all candidates, if you have not submitted your Voters Guide answers yet, please do so ASAP. Questions are welcome from the audience. There are index cards that you'll write your question on. If you need a card or if you need your question to be collected, just raise your hand and someone will come to help you. Jean Rabineau, seated here, has been a Connecticut member of the League for many years and is also a very accomplished moderator. Thank you, Jean, for answering our call. And I'll now turn it over to Jean. Thanks, everyone.
All right, I am told that I have to have my hand on this button at all times when I'm talking, and so will the candidates. So this is not the sort of format where they can just wander around. They're going to have to be seated. They're going to have their hands on the mics. Will the timer for Ms. Leeper please show her sign? Timer for Mr. Farnan, please show sign. For Ms. Kite? All right, for Ms. McLeod?
I'm sorry, it's Kit.
Kit? My apologies on that. All right, each of you can ask for your elapsed time at any time you want, but the timers will show all the candidates, all the signs at the close of each round of questioning. By sheer luck, we're putting the first question to the House 132 first, and then we'll go down the table. The second question will start with Mr. Farnan. The third question will start with the House candidates for the 134th, Ms. Kitt, and the fourth question will start with Ms. McLeod, and we keep going around. There will be no opening statements. Each candidate will get a 2-minute closing statement separate from the time for the answers. The answers are not timed. This is what is known as a modified cumulative format. Each candidate starts with a certain amount of time, and at the end of each round of questions, they'll see what they have left. Okay? They will get a 30-second warning when they're about to run out of time, but I ask the candidates to consider where they are when they see the signage. There will also be a stop sign if by any chance they use up their entire elapsed time. There will also be a 30-second warning and a stop at the end of the closing statements. Those of you who are in the audience, because this is being taped for reshowing, we are asking you not to be doing any taping or any noise making, because it gets in the way of the video that we're producing for the voters. If you have a cell phone and you have not already muted it or put it on vibrate, please do so now. All right. Candidates, are there any questions? All right. That having been, this is going to be a pain. We'll see how many questions. We'll see how many questions we get through. Okay. The first question starts with Ms. Leeper, and it's a two-parter. Do you support the ballot referendum on amending the state constitution so that Connecticut could potentially provide for early voting? And second part, do you support no excuse absentee voting? Why or why not?
Thank you, Jean, and thank you to the League for hosting this forum and everyone for giving up a portion of your evening to come and tune in. This is a great opportunity for us to all share why we're running and what we hope to accomplish for the state, so thank you. I absolutely was proud to vote in favor of the referendum being on the ballot for early voting and also support no excuse absentee voting. We're one of 4 states in the country with no early voting, and I think there's no reason for that. There's almost no evidence of voter fraud, and our democracy is stronger the more people we're able to get to participate.
Hold it. Oh, okay. All right, perfect. I can handle that. First and foremost, I'd like to thank the League for putting on this event. It's nice to see everyone back in person. It is so great to talk about these issues. And I'd also like to thank my opponent. Excited to be here and ask the question. I do support both. I think we need to support in-person early voting. I think 45 states currently have it, and it's exciting that we do have it, and I believe even the DC has it. We do need to ensure that we have one vote for one person. We did see an issue during COVID when the AB mailouts were sent out and the rolls were not up to date. But those are common sense things that we could check into. But at the end of the day, the more people we have participating, the better.
I absolutely support both early voting and no excuse absentee voting. It is being done safely and effectively across our country. There is no reason for us not to adopt these measures. I believe strongly that the more people who are involved in our democracy, the stronger our democracy is.
Again, I echo my colleagues' thoughts that we're also grateful for this opportunity and the venue to speak about these things, so thank you. At the risk of not beating a dead horse as the 4th person, I also agree that early access to voting is critical. I think voting is a constitutional right that we're also grateful to have in this country, and I think the more access we get to people getting their voices heard and being a part of our democratic process is imperative in order for our country to actually function the way it's intended. I can give you a tangible example. As somebody who commutes over an hour a day to work, and my husband who commutes into Manhattan, having access to voting, and whether it's through an absentee ballot with no excuse required, is critical to get people's perspectives. We all live really busy schedules, and sometimes it's tough even on election day to even get to the polls on time after a long day after commuting, so I absolutely support it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you all 4. Timers? Okay, thank you. Next question starts with Mr. Farnan. It's about election integrity. Is there anything the Connecticut legislature should or could do to improve election integrity in the state? And if so, what?
With election integrity, to my other point, you saw this in a recent Bridgeport primary where there were some shenanigans. There are ways that you can look for election integrity, but we have to be very careful. For example, requiring photo IDs could potentially be restrictive and hurt some people's ability to vote. So it's a balancing act like anything in life. So there are things that we could do, like whether it's getting a utility bill or some other type of proof, but we have to be careful that we don't do it in a way that could be potentially restrictive on a person's ability to get out and vote.
I believe that election integrity is essential to our democratic process. I do not believe that we have a voter fraud problem here in Connecticut. I would resist doing anything that would hamper people's ability to vote, such as requiring photo ID, and I would insist on evaluation of our election systems and our voter rolls in a way that's ethical and equitable and to make sure that our laws are being followed, but I would stop at impinging people's ability to vote.
I think election integrity is absolutely an important part of our democratic process. I think we all have to respect the democratic process, and in that we have to recognize that there's systems in place that are going to be required to verify that whoever's coming to the ballot. I think, as Mr. Farnan said, we have to balance what those issues are and make sure we're not impinging on anybody's constitutional right to vote. But at the same time, I think we also have to recognize the severe difference it makes in our country every time we hold accountable our election process, and I think it's entirely critical that we continue to do so.
Of course, election integrity is of paramount importance, and I think that the examples of irregularities that have been referenced and we've seen in Bridgeport are examples where the system caught those irregularities and both had recounts and now is having another election so that voters can feel confident that their votes count and that the outcome of their election is accurate. I think we also benefited from being able to clean the rolls after the absentee ballot applications were sent out in the 2020 election, and a lot of data clearing was able to happen at both the town level and the state level. And I also think it's just really important to remind folks that elections are locally administered, and so it's the folks we know in town hall and our voter registrar's office who are responsible for our ballots, and it's not happening up in Hartford and it's not happening in Washington, D.C., it's here in Fairfield, so that people can feel confident, because we need to push back on the narrative that unfortunately has been growing in our country that we cannot trust the outcome of our elections, because once people don't trust their vote, they become disengaged, and we get back to the problem where we don't have enough people participating in our democracy. And we need everyone to feel like their vote counts so that they participate and we feel confident in the outcome of our elections, and that is what will strengthen our democracy.
All right, the next question goes to Ms. Kitt first. And it's about State Law 830G, which the question writer called imperfect in many ways. If you could amend 830G, what would you change? If it were repealed, how alternatively would you address the critical lack of affordable housing in Fairfield?
I know firsthand how difficult a time our town has had with 830G and also with addressing our housing needs. I've knocked literally thousands of doors this summer, and I hear so much sadness about how our town is changing, how our small, quaint homes are being replaced by more luxury housing, and our rents are skyrocketing. And the parents are worrying that their children won't be able to return home after they leave the nest, and seniors are afraid that they can't stay here in the towns that they love. We are quite frankly pricing ourselves out of our own town. Right now, almost 50% of the renters here in Fairfield are income burdened, meaning they spend more than 30% of their income on housing. I'm already working with Fairfield's Town Plan and Zoning Commission to find solutions to balance our housing needs with the need to protect our town's infrastructure and natural resources. I know the limitations of 830G, and I know what we need to do to reform it to help towns like Fairfield have the tools and resources they need for smart development. For example, I'd like to see us develop objective design criteria that can be put into 830G legislation that towns can use to make sure that new buildings harmonize with existing buildings here in town. We can provide more tools and resources and expertise so that we don't have to rely on developers' experts' testimony when we're deciding whether or not to approve an 830G application. And when elected, I will continue to this type of work, working with local zoning commissions, advocating for smart, long-term solutions to our housing needs to ensure that the people who already live here can afford to stay here.
I think we can do a lot of discussion around the imperfection of 830G, but we can also call it what it is, which is a failed law. It's bad law. It's the way it's written. It is not achieving the goal that it was intended to serve. And when you have bad law, you throw out bad law and you start with new law. I don't believe amending it is the right way. I think we need to repeal the law, and we need to look at exactly where the failures were in the previous version. I believe what I would suggest is increasing the percentage of affordability requirements for developers. I would require a really hard conversation with developers about whether offering tax incentives are a reason for them to actually follow the rules to achieve the goal that they're supposed to be serving. And I think we do really need to look at the issue of affordability in our state. As somebody who purchased my first home here 3 years ago, the unaffordable nature is not foreign to me. You know, for young families and for older retiring seniors, we have an affordability issue. And we're doing our state a great disservice by not doing what we can to make sure that people can deserve to live, thrive, grow, and watch their families grow in this state. But 830G is just not doing it. And the more we dance around the issue and say that we're going to fix it, we're going to go back, we're going to revisit the sunset protocols, we need to throw out bad law. We need to start with new law. And from a legal perspective, that's what we do every day in this country. We need to start doing it in the state of Connecticut.
I might spend more time talking about 830G than anything else we deal with in the legislature. And I have expressed numerous times my serious concerns about 830G and its approach to facilitating the development of affordable housing that works for our community. And I so often hear this debate framed as a partisan one. But I'll tell you, it's much more of a class issue than a partisan issue. In my official capacity as a state legislator, I've proposed substantive solutions via public hearing to our housing committee to address these concerns. However, running a campaign promising to repeal 830G is theatrics, because if it were that easy, it would have been done. There are no easy solutions to tackling our complex housing needs, but we need serious leaders committed to engaging in more meaningful debate to find the real solutions. We all agree that 830G is flawed, but what I haven't heard are a lot of meaningful solutions on how we can amend the law so that we can address the housing needs that so our seniors can afford to stay in the community where they've invested decades of their lives, and our young people can afford to return. Beyond that, we're facing a housing crisis in Connecticut, and we need smart solutions that diversify housing in a way that works for our town. If we want our economy to grow, we need places for people to live. I'm working on expanding the tools available to developers for middle development, which is what we so often hear we need more of in our community. And growing our first-time homebuyers program so people have an opportunity to build equity in their home. And at the town level, we need a clear plan for our goals and how we will achieve them, because there's nothing about 830G that's preventing us from doing that work. I wish we didn't spend so much time stoking division over 830G, and instead we spent more time talking about what we need and how we get there. Because if we worked together, we could create the Fairfield that we all want.
Sure, thank you. 830G is a failed statute. It's been on the books for over 30 years. It has not created the affordable housing that it was intended to create. And at the end of the day, what are we doing? This law is going to turn Fairfield from a town and a community into a city. We need to change the law. It needs to be repealed and replaced or reformed. There are plenty of things that we can do. Fairfield, for example, has a great affordable housing plan. As for changing the law, there's things that we can do, like increase the percentage of affordable housing from 30% to 50%, because what are predatory developers doing? They're checking the box by doing the 30% of affordable housing units, and then they're pushing forward their huge housing plans. We've seen this with the downtown Umpqua Sanford development. We see this with the individuals who live on High Street or Beach Road, and it's not right that you could have a huge affordable housing complex come up and be built right next to a person's most important investment, their home. We can make changes beyond the 30% to 50%. I also think senior housing should be included in this calculation right now. That doesn't get the same amount of credit. We could also look to potentially change the moratorium requirements for towns that are acting in good faith to meet these obligations. And at the end of the day, this shouldn't be about turning our towns into cities and making our places like Fairfield denser communities. We need to be looking at how do we improve our urban areas? How do we improve our cities? That's where the real leadership comes from. We need to be able to ensure that, millennials and seniors, not only do they want to live here, but let's also make an opportunity they can be in other urban areas. We need to make Connecticut overall, from an urban perspective, we need to do a much better job creating jobs, well-paying jobs there, and improving our urban areas while at the same time not turning our towns into cities. Thank you.
The next question starts with Ms. McLeod. How do you propose attracting businesses and employment to Connecticut?
It's such a critically important question. We have such an affordability issue in this state because we're not doing anything to keep people, businesses, or jobs in this state. We have gone through many years of watching businesses flee. They're leaving. They're going down south. They're going to where land is cheaper. They're going where the operation of business is cheaper. And we're watching our families follow them. People are getting on planes to go take jobs, whether it's in the Midwest or down south. And the remote change of since the pandemic world has not really impacted the fact that we're not reinvesting back in our state. And if we continue on this model, we are doing nothing but creating an unsustainable model for our youth and for our young families to grow up in, and it's time to change. We have got to give incentives to bring business back to the state of Connecticut. We've got to give people reason to want to come here. We've got to make it marketable. It's marketing 101. We need to make sure people know the great things that are about our state, and we need to actually stick by what we say and deliver on that. I think we really need to focus on having those difficult conversations with corporate stakeholders and people who have the ability to move back into our state, and we need to start investing back here so that we can invest in our families to stay here.
I think maybe Connecticut needs a better marketing team because actually we've done a lot of really great work. Over the past 2 years, we've had 28 new headquarters move or grow here in Connecticut. It was just released yesterday, 24,000 new startups here in Connecticut. We have a Boost program that provides $75 million of low-interest loans for startups that are here in Connecticut. We have the Jobs Connecticut program, which provides tax credits for companies that grow good-paying jobs here in our state, and they even get an additional bump in their tax credit if they are located in a distressed municipality. Because it's true, we need to be doing better for our cities, and everybody recognizes that, and there's been hundreds of millions of dollars of investment improving our cities, getting them places where people want their business to be located, but also places where people want to live. And then we also have the Connecticut Innovations Plan, which is a state-backed venture fund that makes equity investments in startups that have potential for job growth. We're doing a lot to attract more businesses because we just benefited from almost 60,000 new people moving here, and we're so happy to have them, but we want them to stay and bring their businesses too.
The last couple years have really been a missed opportunity. We had a historic long run on Wall Street, and we had a lot of federal COVID money coming into the state. Instead of making the structural spending reforms that we needed to make, our government spend at record levels. And now where are we? The federal COVID money has dried up, and the Wall Street boom is sadly over. And we're in a position where we could have really done a better job paying down our unfunded liabilities and reining in our spending, because that spending is still moving forward, but those one-time payment opportunities are no longer there. And once we get our structural house in order, businesses are going to be much more comfortable coming to Connecticut. We do have a lot to offer in Connecticut. We have one of the smartest workforces in America. We have access to New York City and Boston. We have so much going for us, but we have to make the right decisions to get our spending under control. And we also need to look at issues like infrastructure and getting our trains into New York City on a quicker basis. You know, budgets are your priorities, and we have swept infrastructure funding previously. That needs to change. I am also, in my last election, I was also very proud to be endorsed by the CBIA when my opponent got a D rating this year. We can do better than that. At the end of the day, we need to create good-paying jobs to give people a reason to stay in Connecticut. There was a big influx of people that came to Connecticut outside of New York City, but we also need New York City to come back too. At the end of the day, New York's success is going to be our success. So another thing we can do is we got to look at the fact that how do we get smart manufacturing jobs into Connecticut? You could look at an example where, like a Worcester to Boston comparison, where Boston has kind of academic clusters and abilities for people to create innovative ideas, where Worcester is the manufacturing hub. You could see that with New Haven and Fairfield County with our colleges, and potentially see other areas like Bridgeport where we could have manufacturing hubs. There's so much more we can do. And I'll stop there just because I want to keep some of my time.
I take a little bit of issue with some things that have been said here. I want to dispel the myth that people are leaving Connecticut in droves. Our real estate market shows that that's not happening. And yes, in the past, we have spent when the money's been here, and we have borrowed from our pension funds when it's not. Our governor has recently broken that cycle, paying down our liability debt, saving us millions of dollars every year moving forward. And our budget surplus is full. Our rainy day fund is fully funded. Moving forward, I'd like us to use some of that excess funding to invest in businesses. Again, to echo what Ms. Leeper said, in our latest census report that was released just this week, Connecticut ranks #2 in the nation for new startups. That's #2 in the nation. People are starting businesses here in Connecticut, and I want to support that. I support the governor's Boost Fund and his new business toolkit. I think we need resources like that to foster innovation and entrepreneurship here in Connecticut. I'd also like to see us partner with universities to harness the brilliant innovations coming out of these universities so that we can turn those into economic opportunities and jobs right here in Connecticut.
All right, the next question starts back with Ms. Leeper first. What changes, if any, would you make to Connecticut's gun legislation? And specifically, would you vote to change Connecticut from its present status as an open carry state?
So this year, for the first time in American history, gun violence is the leading cause of death for our children. And so I feel really proud to be in Connecticut, where we've been very proactive about making our community safer for our kids and for everyone. I'm proud to be one of 2 candidates in Connecticut endorsed by Everytown for gun safety, as well as Moms Demand, as well as Connecticut Against Gun Violence. I also was proud to vote in favor of strengthening our red flag law, which keeps guns out of the hands of those identified as an extreme risk, as well as investing $6 million in community gun violence prevention and creating a permanent office of gun violence prevention within our Department of Public Health. So often, the horrible school shootings get so much media attention, but the real everyday gun violence, it happens in our communities and it happens in our homes with deaths by suicide. And the initiatives we've passed in the legislature tackle those 2 areas head on. Unfortunately, what's happening right now is I have 2 colleagues in the General Assembly who are suing the state of Connecticut, or rather representing the CCDL, and suing the state of Connecticut, saying our assault weapons ban is unconstitutional, and they would like to see AR-15s for sale back in Walmart. So a lot of what we need to do is defend the status quo of what our strong gun legislations are, because every year there are efforts in the General Assembly to weaken these laws. Additionally, I think of the horrible incident we just saw in Bristol, is that we need to be doing more to prevent stockpiling, and we need to further crack down on sales of ghost guns and straw purchases, because we know that there's nobody checking the guns that are coming across state borders. So there's always more work to do, and I remain committed to doing that, because our kids deserve more from us than having gun violence be the #1 cause of death.
I proudly support the Connecticut gun laws that we have on the books. We've did a great job after the tragedy of Sandy Hook to put common sense gun protection into place in Connecticut. From my perspective, the real issue we have with gun safety at this point, with the solid, strong laws we have in Connecticut, we also see that there's strong laws in New York, New Jersey, Massachusetts, But what happens? You have a state like Pennsylvania that has weak gun laws and a highway system. So we really need to start addressing this issue at the federal level. To me, that is first and foremost the area where gun safety needs to be addressed, and I am proud of what we've done here in Connecticut and the gun laws that we have here. And as for the comment on Bristol, we should definitely keep those officers and their families in our prayers. And also, it's a good reminder that we also need to show greater admiration to our police officers for what they do every day. Thank you.
I have been a proud supporter for stronger gun laws for longer than I can imagine. My first job out of grad school, I staffed the Gun Violence Prevention Committee for Partnership for Prevention, a national nonprofit. I moved from a state with weak gun laws, from Virginia. That was the source for many of your illegal guns here in Connecticut. So I was proud to move to a state that has sensible, strong gun laws, and I will fight any attempts to weaken those laws. What we also need to focus on, though, a lot of people will say that, well, that only addresses legal guns. We need to address illegal guns. Yes, we do. And we need to fight gun violence, and we need to get those guns off the street. My sister's a police officer. I worry every day when she's out on the streets that she is going to get shot. She worries that somebody with an illegal gun will shoot her. There are proven public health approaches that we can take to reducing interpersonal violence from guns among youth, among gang members, in high crime areas of cities. These are comprehensive, holistic approaches, public health approaches with data and statistics and evidence to back them up. I would like to see us invest more money in this type of intervention because we can't keep going with the status quo.
I think we have a major issue of gun violence in this country, and anybody who denies that that's an issue isn't living in the same world I'm living in. We all were in the same state a couple towns over when we all heard on the news what was happening at Sandy Hook, and I think few of us would be hard-pressed to say that that didn't change the way we looked at large gatherings or anywhere we went without really thinking twice how safe we are. We are fortunate in the state of Connecticut to have some of the strongest gun laws, and we were one of the first states to have red flag laws. That being said, a huge void in a lot of what we've discussed so far on this issue is the major mental health crisis we have in our country right now. And as my opponent mentioned, there's a lot of public health approaches that, as a fellow public health expert, I would suggest are critically important we focus on, and that is to tackle the fact that we have a major mental health crisis, and it's only increasing since the COVID pandemic. We have got to recognize that there are people that are going to say, you know, the guns that are the issues aren't the legal guns, but that's a reality of the fact that it's all in the context of a mental health crisis where people have access to things that cause problems. We can do a lot of things about the laws of safe guns and legal guns, but when they're coming across porous borders in the continental US like we live in, and when they're being 3D printed and getting into the hands of people that have dangerous proponents to create crime, it's a serious epidemic from a public health perspective that we really do need to focus on. That being said, yes, we have a constitution that provides a Second Amendment right, but I don't necessarily agree with a lot of the people that believe that that's a right to own an AR-15 and be able to buy it at Walmart. I think we have to make sure we're keeping our kids safe. We have to make sure we're keeping our movie theaters safe, our concerts safe, our shopping marts safe, our churches safe. The fact that I can continue rambling on locations shows that this is a serious issue, and although we're safer in Connecticut than we are in other states, we have to recognize that these unlawful guns are getting into the hands of people that have yet to receive mental health treatment that would really change the way that we can remain safe.
This next question will go to Mr. Farnan first, and let's see the times. All right, we're getting down to the wire, aren't we? All right, thank you. This starts with Mr. Farnan. Since the Supreme Court of the United States has stated in Dobbs that reproductive rights should be determined by individual states, what do you believe should be the rights of women in Connecticut regarding abortion? Should our current laws be changed, and if so, in what way?
So I am unequivocally pro-choice. I was really disappointed by the Dobbs decision. I'm an attorney by background, And I really struggled with it, and it disappoints me, and I'm glad that we have strong rights in Connecticut for a woman to choose to make the best decisions for herself and her body. I would also say that when it comes to the law, it was really disappointing to me with the timing. When you look at our nation and how it is so polarized and people aren't talking to each other, it was a decision that really poured gasoline on a fire, and that was another component of it that really upset me, because not only did women lose certain important rights, but it just was something that just further divided us as a country, and that really hurts me. Thanks.
I am 100% unequivocally in favor of a woman's right to choose, and that the decision to have an abortion rests solely with a woman and her doctor. We knew this was coming. Women across this country knew this decision was in the making because, and I don't like to be partisan, but in this case, the Republican Party has been working for 50 years to overturn Roe v. Wade. We think we need to be vigilant here in Connecticut. Yes, abortion is settled law here, but we all thought it was settled law in the United States. So I will continue to fight to make sure that women have access to safe, affordable health care, and abortion care is health care.
I am also unequivocally pro-choice as a young woman, and it's not something I'll apologize for as a Republican, and I think it's an unfair blanket statement to say that Republicans have been fighting for the overturn of Roe v. Wade, because also, as a lawyer, I think it was a surprising decision. I think it kind of gave everybody pause that legal precedent could be overturned after 35 years, and what does that mean for other things coming down the pike? But I do think it's an unfair statement to say that the general party was fighting to overturn it, because there's people like myself that believe in a woman's right to choose. I believe the same words you use, that abortion is health care, access to informed decision-making for young women, especially having access to resources to make sure that they're making those decisions with the best solutions and resources that are provided to them are critical. It's one of the most difficult decisions I imagine any young woman can face, and I believe that any court or any government that feels that they can infringe upon that, telling somebody what they can do to govern their own body, is a huge overstep in government control. And I really do, I think as Brian echoed, I had issue with the decision, but the reality is, from a legal perspective, Roe v. Wade was flawed in the way that it was drafted. It was flawed in the constitutional requirements that it relied upon, and it was primed to be overturned, but that doesn't mean that the impact should have what it had. So I believe strongly that the state of Connecticut, it is codified in law, but I am not naive enough to believe that that doesn't mean that we won't be dealing with it again, and if it's ever put in front of me, I again state I am unequivocally pro-choice and a young woman Republican.
It's not dramatic to say that women will die because of the overturning of Roe. In the same way that abortions happened before Roe, they will continue to happen in a post-Roe America, and women will be the victims of that. It's easy to say you support Roe after it's been overturned, but we need leaders who show up and do the work to protect the rights of women. I was proud to be in the legislature's Reproductive Rights Caucus, and unfortunately, we did not have one Republican standing with us in that caucus fighting for our rights. We made sure that women and medical providers were safe from extradition to some of these radical bounty hunter-style laws passed in other states, and we did that proactively because we knew this was coming. We need leaders who will show up and not politicians putting out paid advertisements targeting Democrats, telling them they're pro-choice when it's too late. I'm proud to be endorsed by Planned Parenthood, and I'm proud to stand up for women because the Supreme Court is not done. They've already signaled to us that they're coming for contraception, and IVF could be next. So we have a lot of work, and we can't wait until it's too late.
This may be the last or next to last question before closing, given how much time is available. And it goes to Ms. Kitt first. What should the state do to help Fairfield with measures to protect against flooding and other impacts of climate change.
Being a coastal community, Fairfield is at high risk to suffer from the effects of global warming and rising sea levels. Superstorm Sandy was a great example of just how vulnerable we are. If you look down at the beach area, the landscape is completely different from what it was before Superstorm Sandy. Just recently, as a member of Fairfield's Town Plan and Zoning, I voted in favor of the town purchasing property along the Rooster River to mitigate flooding issues. I'm honored to have the endorsement of the Sierra Club and the Connecticut League of Conservation Voters, and I believe Fairfield needs to work with experts to develop climate control, to fight climate change and to mitigate the very real effects of these increasingly severe and frequent superstorms. And the best thing we can do is to rely on our science, to acknowledge that climate change is real, and to make sure that we have equitable and sound policies to deal with the changes that our town will be seeing. I believe we have about 40,000 houses that are at risk for flooding in the next 40 years to be wiped out, essentially, by rising sea levels. So this is a real threat that we need to address now. We need to invest money, we need to invest expertise, and we need to invest in technology. Thank you.
Climate change is a reality. I think the major issue with addressing climate change is we have to figure out exactly what it is we can do about it and in what time frame. And I think that's where the major source of contention comes, because there's a lot of people that think we can make really drastic changes in the next year or two and it's going to have an impact in 5 years. And then there's a lot of people that think that the impact of climate change, where we're not really going to see the benefits for 10, 15, maybe 100 years. I think we do need to invest in honing in on the science to identify what we actually can do that's going to have the greatest return on our investment and the greatest impact, and then focus on how to fund those programs and where we need to focus. I think a really good example of how Fairfield has been incredibly impacted by the rising sea levels of climate change impacting is the fact that we also had really poor infrastructure responses in the critical times of emergency management, but also in our long-term ability to repair the damage that was done. You know, we were in towns that were without power for 7 to 11 days, depending upon which doors you've knocked this summer, that say, how'd you guys do through Sandy? And that response on a provider level, UI or whoever is your provider, was somewhat disheartening, and I think we weren't as prepared as we should have been for emergency responses, and that's a reality of climate change, that we're not going to change how this is going to impact us the next hurricane. We need to make investments on how we respond to those impacts, but we also need to, at the same time, simultaneously make investments in the long-term impacts to our climate change. I think we need to accept it's a reality. Again, I don't think anybody would be able to say that climate change isn't a threat to us. We just have to see how we address it in the most cost-efficient way to get our best return on that investment.
In 2021, we did in fact pass a bill in the legislature that enabled communities to pass a conveyance tax to fund stormwater management and flood mitigation. So we have that ability now in Fairfield for Fairfield to take that proactive measure should they want to. But there's, of course, a whole lot we need to do. And thankfully, we also have taken really aggressive measures to reduce emissions. We've moved forward our benchmarks and standards to lower emissions more rapidly because we know that's related to increasing temperatures and rising sea levels. And anyone who has followed me in any capacity for the past 2 years has heard me say time and time again that Fairfield is projected to be the most dramatically impacted community in Connecticut by rising sea levels. So we have a lot of work to do, and I'm grateful that we have a committee here in town that focuses on flood mitigation and coastal resiliency, but they need more partnership from the state, and I'm committed to doing that.
This is an issue that I am very passionate about. I've dedicated the last 11 years of my life to the fight against climate change. I am the first hire of what is called the Connecticut Green Bank. It's a bipartisan approach to address climate change by leveraging and attracting and bringing in private capital so we can switch over to a clean energy economy. We have been so successful that other states from red, blue, and purple have followed our lead. Even other countries across the globe have established their own green banks. And in this past year, I am proud to say that we now have a national green bank that was just brought into law. And I had the opportunity in the last 2 months to work with Senator Blumenthal and Chris Murphy on this actual topic. So, this is an issue that's going to take our entire country to get behind. At the local level, obviously resiliency is a really important issue. I live down in the beach area. I think I was in my house for 3 weeks before Hurricane Sandy. What we can do is probably more at the state level, in my opinion, where we can transition to cleaner and cheaper and more reliable energy sources is where I'd like to be focused.
This question is going to start with Ms. McClote. I would advise the candidates that they may be seeing warning signs for 30-second warnings and stop. And this goes, one way to improve Connecticut's ability to attract businesses is to reduce our unfunded and underfunded liabilities. Do you support using the current surplus to reduce these liabilities? And if not, what would you use?
I've got 30 seconds, so I'll be fast. I think we have a large surplus. I think we need to do something about it. I think we have overtaxed our taxpayers, and we therefore need to invest back into them, whether that's an infrastructure investment, whether that's a community development investment. We need to look at the fact that we need to invest back into our state. So I know I'm running out of time. Thank you.
We thankfully, over the past 2 years, have paid $10 billion down on the unfunded pension liabilities, saving us $450 million a year every year for the next decade, and that's huge. We also have a record surplus, which I think we should apply to any potential cliffs we could be facing due to the federal funds.
So our unfunded pension liabilities, we had such a missed opportunity. When we talk about what was paid down over the last few years, we could have done a much better job if we reined in our spending and actually made structural changes. Because as I said earlier tonight, the reality is that we are at the end of our stock market run and the COVID money has run out. And if we made the structural changes, we'd be in a much better position because next year, sadly, we're going to be back to deficit spending. When it comes to using some of that surplus for tax breaks, I think we could do some targeted tax cuts, but I think it has to be small. When you look at like the diesel tax, for example, with the high cost of inflation, that would be one potential area where we could look to provide a tax because that will directly lead to a lower cost for goods and services and groceries, for example.
We made some promises to our state employees and our teachers. We need to honor that and keep funding our pension liabilities. I do believe we should use some of our surplus to that end. I don't support raising taxes. I do support closing the loopholes so we are all paying our fair share to support our communities. I also believe we need to take some of our budget surplus and invest that in growing our economy. I believe we need to be fiscally responsible in our spending and would like to work towards keeping our balanced budgets and to operating our state within our means, but by not shortchanging the people who have given their time and their energy to keeping our state as great as it is.
Okay, thank you all. At this point, at the risk of exercising moderator's privilege, I am not going to ask another question. Timers, please reset your watches. There will be 2-minute closing statements. I should say, please reset your cell phones, actually. They all are. And by luck of the draw, it's going to go down the table, starting with Ms. Lieber.
Thank you again to the League for hosting this engaging forum where we could share our ideas and our vision for the future for Connecticut. It's been an incredible pleasure representing Fairfield and Southport in the General Assembly. I ran for office in 2020 on the promise of rebuilding Connecticut's economy and doing it by putting people first. And I'm proud of how my colleagues and I have delivered on that vision. We've taken meaningful steps to get our economy going in the right direction by paying down our debts and maintaining a historic rainy day fund that will help us weather any potential recession that lies ahead. In addition to the tens of thousands of new people moving into our state over the past 2 years, we've also had 28 new headquarters, 24,000 new startups this year alone. We've made Connecticut more business friendly by reducing the tax rate for unemployment insurance, providing tax credits for growing businesses, and expanding our manufacturing pipeline. We expanded the Earned Income Tax Credit, instituted a child tax rebate, and eliminated income tax on most retirement income, all to make our state more affordable for the middle class. We've done all this important economic work while also investing in schools, youth mental health, tackling climate change, expanding voter access, strengthening pedestrian safety, combating gun violence, protecting women's reproductive rights, all so that we can ensure our state is a place people want to stay. After the 2020 election, I was hopeful we would return to a world where the political parties debated policy differences, but I fear our democracy is even more fragile now than it was. I'm committed to continuing to use my professional background as a data analyst to build common ground, engage in fact-based policy debates, and being honest with constituents about the complexity of the challenges that we face. I've always believed doing the work to find solutions to the challenges we face and not just highlighting the problems. I believe this work is more important now than ever. We need leaders committed to dialing down the temperature of our politics and bringing people together. I've worked hard to do this here in Fairfield, and it's been an absolute honor to serve this community, and I hope to earn the privilege of continuing to be your state representative.
It was an honor to be your state representative in the early stages of the pandemic, and I want to get back up to Hartford to be an independent voice. And I am an independent voice, and that's why the Independent Party of Connecticut, for example, has endorsed me. I grew up in the Naugatuck Valley. My dad worked night shift. That manufacturing job put dinner on the table and got me, my brother, and my sister through college and multiple additional degrees. Those opportunities I want to make sure are available to the next generation, and I'm concerned they're not there. And I look at my parents on a fixed income and how they're struggling right now as the cost of everything is going up and the state is just no longer affordable. And I want us to do better as a state, and I'm concerned about my children and all of your children. If you look at the pandemic, socially and academically they were hurting. Who's been the advocate for them? They need better advocates. My core focus is tax relief. The legislature talks about historic tax relief this last legislative session. But I ask members of the audience and those at home, did your taxes go down? Because I feel like Fairfield County and the individuals that live in our community did not receive the tax relief that they deserved. Overdevelopment. At the end of the day, are we a town and a community, or are we going to become a city? I moved to Fairfield to be part of a town and community, and I'm going to fight to make sure that it remains a town and community. Crime. There is a crime problem in Connecticut and in Fairfield, and this is a big area where my opponent and I are very different. I do think there's a crime problem. I do back the police. She's had the opportunity to support them and voted against qualified immunity. That was a chance to back the police. Clean government. At the end of the day, I believe we need term limits. We need to stop gerrymandering. We need open primaries so that we can have people that are unaffiliated vote in primaries. I think that will get us better candidates. And I also support early voting, as we talked about tonight. And at the end of the day, my promise to you is that I will always represent and I will always do what's in the best interest of Fairfield and Fairfield voters. Thank you.
You know, I've actually never really imagined myself being here running for office. Growing up, all I ever wanted to do was be a doctor, just like my dad. But after spending some summers working with him and then working in top hospitals in Boston, I was troubled to see people in the emergency rooms in crisis because they couldn't afford routine medical care. I saw just how broken our healthcare system is and pivoted directions to devote my career to public health instead of clinical medicine. Since earning my master's degree in maternal and child health, I've spent the last 25 years of my life as an advocate for the needs of women, children, seniors, and people with disabilities. I've successfully advocated for policies to reduce gun violence and to lower prescription drug prices and easing the cost of health care. These are policies that have passed at the national level that are already benefiting the residents of Connecticut. Now, during the last administration, I was troubled to witness as science, reason, and even kindness were ignored in favor of powerful political power grabs, and the people that I fought for were ignored and discounted during the pandemic, and I saw how broken our political system is. So once again, I find myself at a pivot point in my life, asking for your vote and for your trust to be your advocate in Hartford. If I'm lucky enough to earn your trust, I pledge to continue my work to make healthcare, including mental health care, affordable and accessible for everyone. I will continue to make Fairfield and Trumbull more affordable for our seniors and our young adults who want to move back here, and for working families. And I will fight to make sure our schools are strong and well-funded and inclusive. Thank you again to the League of Women Voters for hosting this debate, to my opponent for sharing the stage with me, and to all of you in the audience for being part of our democratic process. Thank you.
The reality is that everybody in this room is living through unprecedented times. We are coming out of a pandemic that has absolutely rocked our world as we know it. It's required us to pivot, it's required us to think differently, it's required us to panic in some instances, and it's required us to call to action. A major opportunity that we all have here tonight is, in our closing remarks, is to reflect on why we're doing this. And if anybody asks us probably in the last couple of weeks during this crazy election time, many of us would probably laugh and say, yeah, I don't know why, right? But the reality is, I think we all owe each other a great pat on the back that it takes a tremendous amount of sacrifice and service to do what we're doing, and that's because we all truly care about making Connecticut better, about making our districts better, about being a voice for our neighbors. And we can sit here and talk about our endorsements and everything we've done, but quite frankly, that's old news. We got to talk about what we're going to do. We got to talk about why we're qualified to do it, and we're not going to go through our CVs and our resumes because most of the people in this room have already done that on each of us, and you all know what we do and why we do it. You need to have faith in why certain people are going to stand up and be a voice for you. My father had always told me that many are called and few stand up. And the reality is we're lucky to live in a community where the people who stand up have the natural-born advocacy to speak on behalf of their neighbors, and I feel strongly that I do. I can tell you about all the reasons why I'm qualified to do this, but I think my best record is the fact that I lobbied 3 bills as a volunteer. I wasn't a paid lobbyist. I wasn't even a lawyer at the time. I was a first-year law student. It was that important to me to be able to advocate for my neighbors, to educate myself on the issues, to critically analyze and review the litigation details when having to represent people and make sure that our voices are heard. And that's just something I can vow to do, to continue to represent our neighborhoods, our friends, our residents, because the reality is we need to do better in this state. Things are unaffordable. We're losing local control. We are at odds with each other. We're divisive, and we're not reaching across the aisle to get things done. And I feel strongly that I am somebody who can do that for us, so I hope to earn your vote. Thank you.
My profound thanks to the audience, the candidates, everyone who submitted questions. We are now taking a 10-minute break. Thank you all. debate, which is for Senate District 28, are substantially similar to the rules for the two House debates that were included immediately before, except that each candidate will have 20 minutes time to fill rather than 10, unless that's changed. Yeah. There being two candidates on stage, we think we can accommodate. Once again, each candidate will have a 2-minute closing statement. It is 10? In that case, we're going to be out way early. Okay. I'm also going to say this. There were a number of excellent questions that we didn't get around to asking the first time around, but I may exercise moderator's privilege and re-ask some questions. That being the case, by luck of the draw, the first question is going to go to Mr. Gavin first, followed by Mr. Wong, and it is as follows. Tragically, our and other schools have lost students to suicide. If elected, how will you work to ensure adequate access by families to mental health resources?
First, thank you so much for having me. I appreciate the league putting on this debate, and I appreciate my opponent, Senator Wong, attending and showing in good faith a debate for everyone to hear. And with that question, I think one of the biggest things is just funding mental health services in our schools, which we took a great step forward in this last legislative session. But going beyond that, I think we need to think even more broadly about this issue. And that's where I come in. My background is in technology policy. I worked ever since I got out of the military to help people prevent child abuse, child exploitation, and keep kids safe online. And that's what I'll do if I'm elected. If I'm lucky enough to be elected, I will pass an age-appropriate design code here in Connecticut. That'll go a long way in keeping our kids safe online and helping their mental health. Right now, the most divisive content rises to the top of a newsfeed. It shouldn't be that way, and it doesn't have to be that way. There's legislative solutions that could make it better. I think I'm probably one of the few people with a technology background, especially in technology policy, who would be joining the General Assembly in Connecticut. I don't think there's been any conversation about a kids code, which they just passed a first-in-the-nation bill in California. And it's based off of UK legislation that is proven to have worked. It's been in the UK for a year now, and it means that kids in the UK, they won't get auto-recommended and auto-played content on YouTube. That's a great win because they won't fall down those wormholes that affect kids' mental health. It's a great win, and it's something that we could have here in Connecticut. It's a great win because no longer in California, just across the country, kids are able to avoid being messaged by by adults who aren't their friends. People over 18 can no longer message kids in California on Facebook and Instagram unless they're friends. That makes a huge difference in children's mental health and how safe they are. So I think we need to think about this in a lot more ways than just funding mental health services, although of course I want to do that. Thanks.
Thank you. And mental health resources are absolutely critical. COVID has exacerbated the need for mental health for our youth particularly, but also for the general population. I think it's important for us to recognize that mental health is parallel to physical health. And I'm very proud that the legislative body, in a bipartisan basis, passed 3 significant mental health bills, one related to schools and its impact of COVID on our children. Another area looked at addressing mental health professionals, increasing their access and resources and availability. I think the third area that we did was to reevaluate how we approach mental health services. I'm very proud to have been a part of every single one of those 3 bills. And I acknowledge that we need to spend money and make an investment in that arena. That's been significantly lacking. I'm very proud to be a testament of my success in that area. We still have a long way to go, but I'm very proud to have been supported by the Connecticut Psychological Association that saw me as a distinguished leader to address the needs, not just this year, but for my past record of accomplishments. Thank you.
Thank you. Next question starts with Mr. Wong. What should the state do to help Fairfield achieve more economic and racial diversity?
Well, I've been in town for over 28 years. I've raised a family here. As a first-generation immigrant and an Asian American, I'm living the American dream. The diversity that I've experienced in choosing Fairfield, a town of over 62,000 with diverse neighborhoods, diverse communities, all one needs to do is go to McKinley and see a school that has over 50 languages within its population. Diversity is very much alive and well in our community. Can we do better? Absolutely. I think curriculum that we have enacted in legislation to increase awareness and sensitivity to various ethnicities, cultures, and background is an important part of that. Another bill that we worked on diligently is to address the issue of no tolerance on hate. We addressed and made hate crimes punishable by significant laws. But ultimately, it is an awareness for us to engage as a community. We are in such divisive times where people go to their corners. Neighbors no longer talk to each other because of labels and an unwillingness to see differences of opinion. So I think for me, how we can increase diversity, increase awareness, increase opportunities is to engage and to learn each unique perspective. And I'm proud to also add that I've been able to add as part of the legislative leadership to include Asian Pacific American into our curriculum to understand the important contributions of those communities. But we have also added Native Americans as well as various other groups in raising awareness. Awareness, sensitivity, and engagement is an integral part of that solution.
Same question to Mr. Gavin, and I've had a note passed to me from the people recording this for rebroadcast to please speak closer to the mic. Yeah. All right, thank you.
Thank you so much for this question. For me, it comes down to education. For every dollar invested in a low-income student's education, the eventual earnings for these students will increase by over $1. So it's critical for the economy of this state to ensure that we're fully funding our schools so every student gets a high-quality education, regardless of their zip code. And it's not just high school or elementary school education. It's also investing in workforce development in cities in our state. Preparing young people for the economy of the future will have a profound impact on business growth in our state, across our state. While I was transitioning from the military, I completed a coding boot camp. A lot of my peers, they only had a high school degree. There were no college education at all. And yet, in a short 14-week program, they were propelled into cutting-edge software engineer jobs. The governor is making unprecedented investment in workforce training to close the skills gap and train the workforce of tomorrow. And that includes $110 million in short-term workforce training programs, like the ones I went through, to help unemployed or underemployed residents earn high-paying jobs in high-demand industries like healthcare, IT, energy, and manufacturing. So when I think about diversity, I think about opportunity. We can further transform the impact of Connecticut's debt-free community colleges by implementing programs in emerging fields such as cybersecurity, data science, software development. 2 years ago, my opponent unfortunately voted against establishing Connecticut's debt-free community college program. And just this last legislative session, my opponent again voted against expanding eligibility for the debt-free college program as part-time students in this year's budget. I want to see us continue investing in emerging industries like clean energy and high-tech manufacturing, and I think that's going to go a long way in diversifying our state.
All right, thank you both. The next question goes to Mr. Gavin first. Yes, and I want to see times. All right, thank you. All right, the question is, do you support the ballot referendum on amending the state constitution so that Connecticut could potentially provide for early voting? Do you support no excuse absentee voting? Why or why not?
Absolutely. As was stated in the previous debate, we're one of only 4 states in the nation that doesn't allow for early voting. And we're first in the nation in so many ways. We have first in the nation gun safety laws, reproductive freedoms, education. Why are we so far behind on this? It just doesn't make sense. One of the reasons that I ran was because my opponent voted against legislation that would ease access to absentee voting in the midst of the pandemic. That just doesn't make much sense to me. I think we should be making our democracy stronger, more inclusive. When I was in the military, I always cast my absentee ballot by mail. There's no reason someone immunocompromised shouldn't have that same privilege. Thanks.
Thank you. One of the realities of experience, of having 15 years of experience casting votes, thousands of votes, thousands related to amendments and issues, is understanding the complexities of decision-making. It is absolutely essential that we pass the amendment for no excuse absentee voting. And I think it's important that we recognize that 7 years ago, it was a ballot initiative that failed in this state. But the difference is, this only has a section related to no excuse absentee voting. 7 years ago, it included a provision that allows us to change any aspect of early voting by a simple majority of 1. I felt that it was not an appropriate weight in the importance of voting security and voting representation. That being said, this year's bill on the ballot is a simple no excuse absentee voting. I have wholly supported it. And in regards to the commentary that was made by my opponent, the opposition that I had to the balloting that was mailed out in 2020 was it was a full blanket mailing to every single individual in the state of Connecticut. It did not have any consideration for process. It did not have any accountability for money. The bottom line is, legislative policy is not a simple gotcha. It requires thought. It requires process. It requires a respect and balanced approach. Governing is not easy, but we have to respect the process. Understandably, let me be clear, I will and I have supported no excuse absentee ballot to our constitutional amendment.
All right, time, please. All right, thank you. Next question will go to Mr. Wong first. Please elaborate on exactly what you would do in Hartford to protect the coastal areas of Fairfield and the entire community from the devastating impacts of storms such as Hurricane Ian that just went through Florida.
I have been endorsed by the Sierra Club. I have been chosen as an environmental champion by the Connecticut League of Conservation Voters. It is because I care about our environment. Coastal resiliency is a direct impact on climate change. We are recognizing the 10th year anniversary of Sandy, which is not even a hurricane. It was a superstorm. And look at the devastation that it wrought. I think it's important for us to be leaders in initiating policy as well as collaborative action. I just hosted a panel discussion of experts from our community, from our state, from national organizations, in addressing the issue of coastal resiliency and recognizing the great work of people in our community and their awareness and concern about coastal resiliency. As is mentioned before, Fairfield has the highest potential risk of real estate loss as a result of any devastating storm. And unfortunately, our 100-year storms are occurring much more frequently, a direct result of climate change. That being said, the actions of legislative leadership, experience, demonstrated accomplishments is important. What I did in that panel discussion, and has been repeated by the experts that have now continued discussions to initiate grant applications and talking among each other for collaborative decision-making and policy initiatives is exactly what leadership in policy is all about. When you've done it and you've led, you bring results. It is about solutions, and I'm very proud that we had a meeting that is going to bring forth solutions and grant applications that will benefit our community.
Respectfully, Senator Wong, I believe that creating laws is making progress, not hosting forums. But I definitely agree with you. Climate change is one of the most urgent issues of our time. In Fairfield County, almost 40,000 properties are at risk of flooding in the next 30 years. And for my generation, climate change is an existential risk, not just an academic one. As your state senator, I'd advocate for investing in alternative energy to create good paying, green jobs, and lower the cost of renewable energy. I'll advocate to lower the cost of green transportation by supporting rebate programs for electric vehicles. I'll advocate to expand the number of charging stations statewide, and I'll advocate to build sustainable public transit infrastructure. We owe it to our community, both in the present and in the future, to protect our environment and make sure that our beautiful state stays this way.
Next question goes to Mr. Gavin first, and it's a repeat. Since the Supreme Court of the United States has stated in Dobbs that reproductive rights should be determined by the individual states, what do you believe should be the rights of women in Connecticut regarding abortion? Should the current safe harbor law be changed, and if so, in what way?
Personally, I could never imagine making this kind of decision for anyone else. That's the way I felt before I ran for office, and that hasn't changed. The role of government should be to empower people in Connecticut, not to control them. And I'd like to keep those protections strong here in Connecticut.
Thank you. Body choice and a woman's choice is equivocally important. As a husband to a wife and a parent to a daughter, I will do anything I can to protect their rights. The overturn of Roe was unfortunate, and it's equally important for us to understand, even though, as we've said many times, it's codified into law in the state of Connecticut for the past 20 years. I think it's tone deaf for anyone to say that it's not important as a federal law and constitutional interpretation, because we are not allowing women in Texas and various other states to have those same rights. 50 years of rights were taken away by a court. So let me be clear. I have and I will always support a woman's right to choose. I have supported body choice decisions, and again, it is important to know that it is not a partisan issue as it's been made out to be. People need to understand that in the vote on an abortion-related bill that I helped to be a part of that construction, 2 Senate senators voted against the abortion bill. How come that does not get addressed? It is a choice of vote. That's the hard thing with policy. Unless you've been in it, you don't fully understand. It's been a privilege of mine to cast courageous and difficult votes. But that being said, to cast this as a divisive partisan issue, as it's been purported to be, I have not had anyone talk to me about 2 Senate women Democrats voting against an abortion bill in this legislative session.
We may get 1 or 2 more questions, and then it'll be closing. This one goes to Mr. Wong first. What would you do as a legislator to improve public safety and support our police?
Public safety is absolutely important. We need to incorporate all shareholders in the laws that we make. We need to reevaluate the qualified immunity for our police officers to be able to do their job. But I also believe that punishment needs to be considered in a different context. Good people can make mistakes. And it is imperative for us to understand there are opportunities, provide second chance opportunities to address issues of symptoms of these kind of crime activities. We need to provide better supportive services, better outlets for young people that have been impacted by COVID and its isolation. Bottom line, crime is important in our communities. You cannot dismiss it by simple data. When people feel as though that their privacy and their public safeties are violated, we need to do a better job and not stick our head in the sand.
Look, we all want to feel safe in our homes and in our communities. The question is, how do we address these crimes? I think long-term, we need community-based diversion programs that curb problem behaviors among juvenile offenders and improve mental health services. You know, just last week, the shooting in Bristol, mentioned in the previous debate, happened, and the perpetrator used an AR-15 style rifle to kill those police officers. So if you're not pro-gun safety, then you're not pro-law enforcement. Illegal guns on our streets put our first responders at a higher risk. We need to strengthen gun violence prevention measures, including funding a Connecticut gun tracing task force to ensure that illegal guns are not making their ways into Connecticut.
This question is going to go to Mr. Gavin first, and then to Mr. Wong, bearing in mind that there is a slight discrepancy in the amount of time available to the two of you. It is, should any changes be made in the education cost-sharing program, and if so, what?
Look, the education cost-sharing formula is a complicated thing, and I don't think we're going to get to the bottom of it in this 2 minutes I have remaining. That being said, I think the most important thing is to fund education consistently. As I mentioned earlier, education is the key to opportunity. It's been a historically difficult time for students, parents, and teachers alike. You know, shifting online, then back into person. You know, my parents are both public school teachers, so I saw first person just how tough it was. They were making resources from scratch. It was incredibly difficult. And now we have to take seriously the learning loss that occurred during those years. So I think, if anything, we need to be considering, in the short term, what can we do to respond to the crisis that we have on our hands? I support collaborating with our school's extraordinary teachers, the administrators, and our parent communities to improve student achievement. And I think that means investing in pre-K learning programs, investing in STEM and computer science programming. It means expanding the availability of health and mental health resources, because you can't learn if you're not okay. Thank you.
I do agree that we need to reevaluate the education cost-sharing system. Two specific areas that are important is looking at excess educational cost formulas as it relates to special education. It's a critical area that's been neglected and implemented improperly. Another area of important consideration is school constructions. Two critical areas that impact our community disproportionately. But again, I agree, the ECS formula needs to be revised.
I'm going to go at this point to closing statements. Timers, please reset your watches for 2 minutes. I have been asked to ask the audience to please not film or record these in any way. The recording that we want people to watch is of the whole debate, so they can get an idea of what the candidates are saying on a large number of issues with unlimited time or somewhat unlimited time. We do not want sound bites here, guys. We do not want to see these in ads. We just want people to hear the candidates in their own words. That being said, closing statements, by luck of the draw, is going to go to Mr. Wong first.
As I begin, I want to say a big thank you to my family for their support and sacrifice in allowing me the privilege to represent our community as your state senator. Thanks to my wife, Grace, who is so accomplished in her profession and my best friend. Our children are our priceless blessings. Both of our kids are equally accomplished, and most importantly, they're wonderful, kind, and caring people. I'm proud to be their father. Their support and sacrifices allowed me to serve and represent the community that I love. First as a town RTM member in education and public safety committees, and then as state representative and now state senator. That's a span of nearly 16 years in public service. That experience and stability has allowed me to succeed in a relentless commitment to our community. And I have diligently worked to represent all the shareholders and all the diverse viewpoints to the best of my ability. It's been a job that I've loved and enjoyed, second to being a husband and a parent. My common sense approach to governance is based on a relentless commitment to our community. By offering solutions that engage and respect all the impacted shareholders and to create sustainable and constructive legislation. In the area of affordability, we need to address our taxation impact on all aspects of our community. We need to look at local governance versus state-mandated one-size-fits-all as it relates to education, as it relates to zoning has been discussed. I think ultimately it is about doing versus talking. And I think it's really important for us to understand that governance is not easy. I'm glad to have a record, and I will say nobody's ever perfect, but I strive to do my best every single day. And I hope that I've earned your trust and support and ultimately your vote in November 8th. Thank you.
I grew up here in Connecticut. My parents were public school teachers for decades. I think it's fair to say their commitment to public service definitely rubbed off on me too. As a student, I was an Eagle Scout. And then in college, I ran a program that connected Yale students to volunteer opportunities with local nonprofits. After graduating with a humanities degree focused on ethics, I went into the Army as an active duty infantry officer. I had some incredible experiences. I met soldiers from all over the country. I led a platoon of tanks and Bradleys. But after 4 years and way too many nights spent out in the field, I was ready to transition back into civilian life. I set out to start a career here in Connecticut, where I grew up. I began working in online safety, preventing child exploitation in the private and nonprofit sector. When it comes to the issues our community is facing, Senator Wong and I, we don't see eye to eye on everything, but there's a lot we agree on too. But the big issue here, though, the elephant in the room is this. Senator Wong's opinions don't carry weight in the state lawmaking process. The reality is, as long as we keep sending him to Hartford, our community does not have a voice when our state laws are getting made. That's because he's not part of the party that makes the laws. Instead, he's with the party that would allow crisis pregnancy centers to mislead women, would allow guns in our state parks, and votes against Governor Lamont's tax cuts just because they don't like who proposed them. So he does constituent service, which is important. And I look forward to doing that energetically as well. But our senator is not part of the lawmaking process in Hartford. That's the reality. We have no voice. But in 3 weeks, we can change that. We can have a new perspective, a strong voice for gun safety, a strong voice for protecting our kids online, a strong voice for our shared economic growth and fiscal responsibility. I'd love to earn your vote. Thank you.
Thank you. On behalf of the League, my thanks not only to the audience, which has been on the whole extremely well behaved, but to all of you who submitted questions, many of which we didn't get to ask, but which were actually wonderful questions. And thank you again for doing this. On behalf of the League, my thanks to the candidates, to everyone. You know what I'm going to tell you now. Go vote November 8th.